You're watching CCN, Clarksville Community Network. Produced by Goodwin Productions. Powered by CDE Lightband.
Hello, my name is William Parker and I'm the historical interpreter here at Fort Defiance in Clarksville, Tennessee. And we are here at Sevier Days, and this is an annual event that we hold here at Fort Defiance, and it's something that I wanted to start since we first opened in 2011. We are commemorating the life of Valentine Sevier. He was one of the first men to settle this hilltop here.
I'm Don Horton. I'm also a board member of the Friends of Fort Defiance. The question was asked me, how did the fort get its name of Fort Defiance? Back in 1862, when Captain Foote, F-O-O-T-E, came up the river with his gunboat, the Cairo, he looked up here at the ridge and saw a white flag flying above this fort. It reminded him of the Fort Defiance up in Ohio. So he said, hey, there's their Fort Defiance. And that's how it got its name. Its name at the time was really Fort Sevier. After that, it became known as Fort Bruce. Colonel Bruce was the Union commander of the town, garrison commander, and so they called it Fort Bruce until the end of the war, as far as I know. If you look in the New York Times of 1862, you will find it's Fort Sevier surrendered to the Yankees, not Fort Defiance. That's the history of the fort and how it's got its name.
We have a blacksmith in attendance today, and we're trying to interpret the importance that a blacksmith was to society back then. The school groups find it hard to believe that there was not a rural king or a Walmart. You had to have it made. And the blacksmith is the one that made the items. He made all the tools, made all the nails. And we've got a period blacksmith there that has brought a forge with him and is showing the methods that a blacksmith used back then to create items.
I'm David Wilkins, and I'm from Dotsonville, and I do blacksmithing as a hobby, and I work for the Montgomery County Highway Department. First thing we're going to do is heat this up and draw it out to a taper. Now we got to draw it out to a nice sharp point. We're going to heat it up and make the stem. I worked in a welding shop for 22 years, and I always wanted to do blacksmithing, and I ran into a couple of people that actually did do it on the side. And I met one of them at a show that I was working at and asked him about teaching me how to do some traditional style blacksmithing, and he started letting me come over to his house a couple times a month, and we'd work on stuff and build different things. The gentleman's name is Larry Cole. He's a good blacksmith. He's taught a lot of people in town how to do blacksmithing. Mostly people just want to carry on the tradition. Larry's trying to make sure people get the opportunity to learn how to do it and pass it on to somebody else. Now we've got the stem shaped. We'll go ahead and flatten out the leaf. Now we have the shape of the leaf. I'm gonna heat it up one more time and flatten it just a little bit more and put some veins in it. Put the veins in the leaf, all we use is just a chisel to put the marks on there. Now that the leaf's got some veins in it, we'll heat it up and make it have a little bit of shape. Now the leaf's good and hot again, we'll hammer it into a block of wood to give it a little bit of shape. Now we'll clean it up with a brass brush and it'll put a little bit of gold patina on the leaf itself. We'll cool it off, and there you go.
We also have a woodworker out here. They didn't have power tools, they didn't have chainsaws. All the tools were hand tools, and he is demonstrating how they would work pieces of wood, pieces of timber to construct buildings, to construct tools, and he is using all period methods also to do this.
Good morning, my name is Bill Maddox. I'm from Hermitage, Tennessee. I am one of the historic interpreters at Historic Mansker Station in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. What I am demonstrating here today at Fort Defiance for the Valentine Sevier Days is the use and operation of a spring pole lathe for turning of treenware. And what I'm currently working on is a piece of sassafras that I'm hollowing out to make a bowl. This here's a pole lathe or spring pole lathe, also known as a reciprocating lathe. These types of lathes, from what I've found, actually date back to ancient Egypt, France, England, Germany, Holland, throughout places, the Scandinavian provinces, even into northern Russia, is where we see these pole lathes really take off. We find that some of the latest use or documented use of these things, other than for a recreational aspect, was in the 1940s when a lot of the chair bodgers would set up out in the forest and very quickly turn out chair legs, spindles, items such as this for the local township's chair builders to come out and purchase these before they had totally dried out. I was stationed with my father in Athens, Greece for 3 years. And pretty much, well, in the 1970s, Athens, Greece at that time was still working in a late 1930, early 1940s method. So many of the outlying areas, even though they had electricity, many of the people there still preferred the old methods of manufacturing and taking care of things. At a very young age, it allowed me to be exposed to not only a birthplace of Western civilization as we know it today, but some of the many aspects of working with one's hands, working with one's feet, or as today as it's commonly called, working with green engines. After coming back from Dad's stationing overseas, when I came back, I just really couldn't find anybody over here that wanted to spend the time to talk with me or train me on how to do woodworking. So a lot of it I had to pick up on my own. And as time allowed, and as I graduated from schools and kept moving forward, trying to find those that were still into the early methods of doing things, every now and then somebody would say they just couldn't see the benefit of working a pole lathe. But every now and then you'd find somebody that was really interested in what was going on. So this is a hook knife, or a more of a bowl tool, bowl hollowing gouge, if you want to refer to it as that. These particular tools started making an appearance on the market here about 13 years ago. And what I have here is I have a dual cutting edge, one on both sides. So depending on what I'm actually doing, whether I'm working on the outside or working on the inside of the bowl, this provides a very small, minute cutting edge that allows me to turn towards the inside of the bowl and actually speed up the hollowing out process. Now, by today's standards, when we compare it to our more conventional tools that we see that modern bowl turners use, you'll notice that there's a marked difference on it. Whereas we're usually working with a 45-degree cutting edge on this particular one here. This cutting edge here on this particular tool, the handmade tool, is set to the user's specific, what they wanted. And the nice thing about this is these here I manufactured out of a good 1095 steel. With utilizing the lathe, even with today's modern tools, it does work. It just usually requires just a little bit more thinking about it. You have to disengage to allow the piece long enough to rewind, but it is still very aggressive. So I usually tell folks, if you can acquire these other tools, use those. But if not, these you just have to learn each tool's, specific workings, its little nuances, how it likes to be used. Over the last 13 years, out of the 17 years that I've been at Mansker Station, my woodworking has actually come to fruition and blossomed. Many of the historic sites asked me to come out and do demonstrations, host demonstrations, actually do tutorials for their staff. And we always try to make it just as fun as possible, because this is usually just an introductory course that I'm bringing them into. But you'd be surprised, though, at how many of them will contact me back later and say, "Hey, Bill, this is what we're doing, and want you to come join us." Other than that, you will get your heart rate up depending on what you're doing. It does work great as far as cardio goes, so a lot of folks enjoy that aspect, and particularly the folks that do not have the money to buy the big expensive pieces of equipment that they think is absolutely necessary. When they come out and they see the simplicity of this one right here and how easy it is to disassemble and transport, they very quickly, this is what I want to do. It's not loud, I don't have to spend a lot of money on it, and look at what I can do.
some of the other exhibits that we had up here. One, and by the way, this was the first time we had tried this, and we had a hatchet thrower up here. And unless you've tried this, it's a lot more difficult than it seems. It's our friends at Fort Defiance, Mark Britton, his son, Sam, was doing the demonstration. He set up a target, and the public could try their hand at throwing hatchets.
My name's Sam Britton. Today I'll be throwing traditional tomahawks. I have a couple different variations. These are just steel tomahawks. This is an example of an Englishman's or a British officer or British infantryman's axe that he would have carried. It has a hammer on one side and then the blade on the other, so it's kind of a multi-use tool. Well, today here we're at Fort Defiance. This is for Sevier Days, which is just a demonstration of multiple reenactors. I'm not actually in reenacting garb, but this is just a demonstration of how it's done. You don't always make all of them, so that's all right. I got my first tomahawk when I was 10. My mom and dad bought it for me just because I had gone around throwing my dad's hatchets and wood splitting axes and knives and whatnot. And they were already into reenacting, so they thought it would be a neat idea. So for Christmas, I got some throwing knives and different kinds of tomahawks, some smaller ones. Tomahawks would have originally been made out of stone with a wooden handle, and iron didn't come along till further on. Different tribes of Indians use them, but typically we associate Iroquois and Algonquin Indians with tomahawks. So this is an example of a modern throwing axe or tomahawk. This is a variation, it's just a SOG brand of throwing axe. It has a pick on one end and then the blade on the other. So it's kind of also a multi-tool use, similar to the British infantryman or English infantryman axe, except it doesn't have the hammer on the blunt side. So there's multiple uses, but you can also throw it. It's super lightweight. It's made out of titanium steel. It usually has a carrying pouch or something that you keep on your hip. Strap it to your backpack. It's an example that perhaps a soldier would carry in some instances. Many modern ones, when there's so many different variations of a tactical throwing axe, but this is just one variation, but it's so much lighter than these other ones that when I switch from the heavier one to the lighter one, it kind of throws me off. These smaller ones here, this is actually the style of the first tomahawk I ever had. These only weigh a couple of pounds, where these weigh 2 to 3 to 4 pounds. Each one's a little bit different. But these are just styles of reproductions of trade tomahawks. This one here, which is the British infantryman's axe, a little bit longer than those smaller ones I showed, but it also has that hammer tool on the side. So it would have been something they would have carried along with them as a survival tool, or just a tool, to hone logs, to hone sticks or saplings to make tripod stands out of, but also they could drive nails or use it as a blunt weapon, as well as also the chopping action. But the file is just to put a rough edge on the ends, but this file is fine enough that I can get it sharp enough to stick into the wood, but not so jagged that it's gonna leave metal flakes all over the blade. Something that's simple as this really only has one action, that is to chop, which is what it would have been used for. Axes historically are used as a tool. That's why in other cultures, such as Vikings, when they were using axes as weapons, it was terrifying because you have such a broad weapon that's meant for chopping. But just as the same way that it can chop a log, it can also chop an arm or chop someone's body. There's a story from Sevier Station about the blacksmith that was there, and one of the accounts after an Indian raid is that he was brutalized by the tomahawk. It would not have been a pretty way to go, even though, and you saw earlier, I didn't stick some of the tomahawks into the log, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't thrown hard enough to cut off an ear or a nose or put a gash into you. That would have been bad enough that you would needed medical attention.
Some of the other activities that we had a lady that had a spinning wheel here, and she was showing how clothes were made back then. Once again, you couldn't go down to Walmart to purchase these, so you had to make your own clothes. Very tedious process, and she was doing demonstrations of that.
I'm Leslie Hatton. I live in Clarksville. I've lived here for about 11 years. I belong to the Friends of Fort Defiance. I am here at Fort Defiance for Sevier Days. This land was originally a settlement created by Valentine Sevier. Sevier Station is the oldest building in Montgomery County. It's a stone station. They believe it is the one that he and his wife sought shelter in during the Indian attack. This is to honor Sevier Days. Those early settlers out here had to be very rugged, and spinning was a very important survival skill, especially on the frontier. Most families had a loom, spinning wheel, and on the frontier especially, they tended to manufacture their own clothing, blankets, and everything they needed. From the beginning to after you've washed the wool, you need to pick it and card it to make rolags. Then from the rolags, you spin. But I'm adjusting it. The maiden has a tensioner, which adjusts the drive band. This is the mother of all. These are the maidens. The spindle is through here, and it supports the bobbin. And what I'm using are rolags, and they make a woolen or a semi-woolen yarn, which means there's a lot more air between the fibers. So when you knit things up with it, it is warmer because the air adds insulation. With every change of the rolag, I move the yarn on the hooks on the arms so that it gradually fill the bobbin up as evenly as possible. Right now I'm making 3-ply yarn, and this wool still has natural linen in it, so that if you knit it tight enough, it to a certain extent will be waterproof. What I'm using is Gulf Coast native wool, which at one time was the most popular breed of sheep in the South. Makes a nice medium wool. They could be used for meat, milk, or wool, so they're a good all-purpose breed. And the Gulf Coast native is now on the endangered species list. But this is something that all women would have learned. A lot of times they were taught on spindles first, so they would learn how to draft the yarn. Spinning was such an important factor that a lot of times one daughter usually stayed at home and cared for the parents until they passed. And then she would go live with another relative, and to pay her way, she would often spin. And that's where the name an unmarried woman became a spinster. I'm slowly learning how to dye with natural foodstuffs. The brown yarns I dyed myself. One is black walnut, the darker one is black walnut, green black walnut hulls. The lighter brown was made, I gathered up dried hickory hulls in the spring and soaked them overnight and then boiled them, and I got the much lighter, the tan color. The blue yarn is actual indigo. The ball of red yarn is madder. I have some prop spindles. This is one of my favorites. This is a Scottish warless spindle. The way you wrap it on, you end up with a center pull ball of yarn. We also brought some lucettes, which was a way to make a very sturdy 4-cornered cord that could be used for stays, lacing up the back of breeches or jackets, or anytime you would need a sturdy cord. Another thing they would have done is the lucettes. Very time consuming, but a very vital and necessary skill to learn, because back then, a lot of looms were not that wide. And if you really wanted to pay someone a compliment, you told them they were a yard wide. Just something I enjoyed doing and sharing, and hopefully my grandchildren will take it up.
We also have several frontiersmen out here, and this is where it really differs from the Civil War events that we have. They are carrying and demonstrating weapons that were used during the late 1790s. These include flintlock muskets, and it's interesting to watch these shoot because they light with a little spark from the flint instead of a percussion cap. So they're using period weapons. And when you pull the trigger, you just kind of hold your breath and hope that it goes off, because a lot of times it doesn't.
On the frontier, a true rifleman going out to hunt a deer might use a powder horn. This would measure how many grains of powder he's going to shoot. So every time he shoots the gun, he would know what powder it is. Put a little powder in your pan, close it, and now you're ready to go. Okay, one of the things that people have asked me is, what if you want to fight, you're out in the woods fighting, right? And you have a loaded gun. What's your safety? Your safety is a leather patch over that. Because then, when you pull the trigger, if you're full cock and you're out hunting Indians, you know, the flint does not hit the powder. Aim and fire.
My name is Thomas Killian, and I'm from Gallatin, Tennessee. I'm here at Fort Sevier, and we're demonstrating colonial period militia drill and weapons. So we're going to demonstrate manual of arms loading procedure for the Brown Bess musket. The Brown Bess musket was the first firearm used by the colonies or America. And it was, before we got French Charlevilles, this was the musket that we were using to fight the Revolutionary War, and used it extensively following that. As you can see, it's a flintlock musket. Takes a pretty big flint, and it's 75 caliber, so that's a bigger than half-inch diameter bullet. And so what we're gonna do is load and fire. Squad attention, load and come to the present. Load. Loaded. About face. Prepare to fire. Fire. Recover. About face. That's the loading drill for the Brown Bess musket.
For current and exclusive content, subscribe to CDE Lightband, connecting you at the speed of light.